If you're too big of a baby like I am to break in boots the old-fashioned way, especially Doc Martens, this is a good video for you because I'm gonna show you 3 different ways how to break in Docs a lot faster, a lot easier, and a lot more efficiently that I've learned over the years of working firefighting, construction, running a leatherworking business for 10 years, running a YouTube channel about boots for 3 years. This is a good how-to with several price points from free to a little bit more expensive on how you can break in your Docs without a ton of boot smooches, AKA blisters, if you don't know that term. So what is this video for? Well, this is specifically for Doc Martens, Solaveras, Grip Fasts, other boots in this Doc Marten-esque category. This will work for other boots, but it's specifically for this. And there's gonna be some things that you'll notice while I'm recording it that you'll be like, oh yeah, that makes sense, it's only for Docs. But you can still use this in other boots. This video is sponsored by Bright Cellars, a cool brand that's combating wine snobbery, and will send you a personalized box of wine every single month. And to be honest with you, I'm not much of a wine connoisseur, which is why I like stuff like Bright Cellars, because it takes a very complicated process and it makes it super easy to try because it goes literally to your front door. And the cool thing about this is they have a 7-question quiz that can quickly match your taste to help develop and curate your palate. And you can choose from 12 different plan options that have over 100 varietals and 80+ different wine regions. And on top of that, you get these little cards that tell you exactly what you should be looking for. And these little educational cards explain tasting notes, pairings, best serving temperatures, and the origin. So that's the thing I really like about this, is it's a streamlined process of how to actually get a taste for wine, and it makes it interesting and unique, and it gives you something to look forward to as you slowly develop this thing. But the cool thing about this is you can have your friends over and you can all go through this together and slowly develop a taste for wine and an actual understanding of the flavor profiles, where it comes from, and essentially the entire wine industry because of how educational these are. So check out Bright Cellars via the link in my description, and thanks to Bright Cellar for giving my followers their first 6-bottle subscription box that's usually $150+ for only $70. Just click the link in the description and take the quiz to get started today, and thanks again to Bright Cellars. And you might be wondering why you need a tutorial on how to break in Doc Martens. That's because they're notoriously hard to break in. They're some of the most popular boots in the world, and they are some of the hardest boots to break in, especially for the price range. And that's because this leather is usually a pretty cheap leather, but they slap a huge coating of plastic on top, and that's where you get this really even finish and the plastic filling. And that's also what makes these boots so hard to break in, because that adds another structural layer on top that you have to break in, and it makes them a lot harder. And one aspect of this that people underappreciate, and even I didn't fully understand when I first did a Doc Marten break-in video, is that this top coat causes a lot of issues when you're trying to break these in, especially if you're using conditioners, because this plastic coating is essentially like putting a plastic bag around your boot and then trying to put a conditioner on it. It's never gonna get through the plastic bag. And so for the last like 60 years, everyone that's put conditioner on the outside of their Doc Marten boots, unless it was anything but this smooth leather, it's a good chance it didn't actually do anything for your boots because it's literally plastic coat on top. To give you an understanding of why and how boots break in and what we're trying to achieve, just so you can understand some of the material science behind it, leather, unlike synthetic materials, is made up of millions and millions of little teeny fibers that all interlink and interweave and are all tangled together. And then there's a top layer of fine, really, really fine fibers that we call the grain. That you probably have seen several times before. It's the smooth part of the leather, that's grain. All the fuzzy stuff that you see with suede, that's all the fibers we're talking about. And so as you look at the cross section of leather, it's just nothing but fibers. And when you break in a pair of boots, what you're doing is loosening those fibers up and getting them malleable again, because when they tan leather, what they do is they take raw hide that's gonna rot and they convert it into a non-rotting material called leather. They use chromium salts, they use tree bark, they use a bunch of other processes to remove the organic bits that rot and replace it with non-organic, well, non-rotting bits, essentially. And during that process, to get as much yield out of a hide as possible and to get as good of a leather as possible, there's a lot of stretching involved, there's a lot of pulling. And so what that does to that fiber structure is it makes it really tight and really compact, even more so than when it was even on the animal. And so the act of breaking in a boot is literally just loosening up those fibers, getting them back to where they're moving again, and they're not breaking, but they're moving. To me, there's 3 ways that you could break in a pair of Docs that most people are going to use. Number 1 is the old-fashioned way. Just grab your pair of new Docs and embrace the boot smooches. Embrace getting blisters, embrace the pain. That's the old-fashioned way of doing it. And it works because, you know, you're slowly loosening those fibers up, and it's gonna be a pain, and it will work over time. But the problem with breaking in a pair of boots that way is, especially with Doc Marten leather, how dry and how foamy this leather is, it means that there's not a lot of natural conditioning and oils and compounds worked into the leather when the boot was made, so it's a really dry and fragile leather. So when you start breaking this in without any kind of conditioning, you're going to inevitably start breaking some of those fibers. That's why it feels a little bit crunchy, because you're slowly breaking all those little teeny fibers. So breaking these in the old-fashioned way is literally the worst way to break in these boots out of the 3 that I'm gonna describe. It's still fine, and it is Doc Martens at the end of the day, and your sole's gonna come apart way before your leather fails most of the time anyway, at least the whole leather, not just the top coat. So that's one way you can do it. It's free, it's easy to do. Well, not easy, it's easy to do, not easy to deal with. And there's nothing wrong with it except for I wouldn't use it on a really high quality boot because you want to preserve that leather as much as possible. The second way to break in Docs, and this is also another free way, but it's a little bit more messy, and that is lubricating those leather fibers with water. So how do you achieve that? Well, a lot of people, they'll take their Doc Martens and they'll throw them on, and they'll get in the bathtub with them, or they'll put them on, or they'll put them in a sink and leave them in the sink for a few hours. And you can do that with a lot higher quality boots, especially if all the internal components are leather, because leather is fairly water resistant. You're still gonna get some shrinking. It's gonna be a little bit of an issue. But with Doc Martens, you do not want to do that because the internal components in Docs are all synthetic. So when you dunk this in water, this fiberboard, which is what you're standing on for the majority of Doc Marten boots, is just paper compressed really, really tight. So when you add a lot of water in there, that water is going to separate and it's going to prematurely wear out your boot, including this little patch here. That's the same thing is gonna happen there. And then once it seeps through the fiberboard, it's gonna go to your midsole. Your midsole's gonna be soggy. It's gonna be heavy. It's gonna be a hard time. You're gonna have a hard time getting all the water out of there. It's just not the best way of doing it. But there is a way you can do it without dunking your whole boot in water and jumping in the bath with water. And that is getting some sink or something. And instead of putting it in sole down first, just put it in top down first. Just give her one of these. And you wanna stop at the insole. You don't want to get your insole wet because of the things we just talked about. So leave that in there for a few minutes, you know, like 20 minutes or so until you feel like the leather's fairly saturated. Then what you want to do is let it drip dry because you don't want to tilt it back up and have all that water run right back down to the insole. You want to leave it drying, hanging up until it's drip dry so there's no more drips coming off of it. You can even reach in there and put a towel in there and dry it off because you're really wanting to get that water into the leather itself. Then, once it's dry enough, what you need to do is throw these bad boys on. You can double up your socks. A lot of people do in this process. And then you just wear them for the rest of the day, or at least until you start to get a hot spot in your foot. And what that's gonna do is add some moisture to those fibers. So as they're slowly breaking up, or as they're slowly loosening up, they're not breaking, and they have some kind of lubricant on the inside. And then as it breaks up over time, or as it loosens up over time, all that leather is going to slowly conform to the shape of your foot. Because if you know anything about leather, when you get leather wet and it dries, it'll take whatever shape it's dried in, especially veg tan leather. And so it's a really good way to get it to fit to your foot, even if it's a little bit snug. The downside of that is once all that water dries out, you've got a really dry leather and there's a chance you washed out any remaining conditioner or oils that was already in this boot that didn't have a whole lot to begin with. So it can be ultimately a negative thing for your boots if you dunk them in water, unless you add a little bit of conditioner. And that's kind of where the third step is, and the most effective, and the one that I've used over and over and over. I still use the wet technique quite a bit, but at the end of this technique, once the boots are almost dry, or even like when you're done with wearing them for the day, that's when you want to condition them. And like I mentioned, there's a big plastic coating on the outside of this leather, which means all that conditioner you think is getting sunk into your leather is just evaporating, and you end up with a film on top because you're just conditioning plastic. So what you need to do is condition the inside of the boot. So you can use any kind of conditioner. We'll go over this in the next step, but you want to condition the inside of the boot so it sinks in and so you're not over drying your boots after you've dunked them in water. Then to the third step, which is kind of a combination of the two, is just conditioning them to death. So same concept as before, where these fibers in the leather are really dry and they're really fragile. And so in order to break them in, they need to be moved and they need to be loosened up. So we want to minimize the breaking as much as possible. Water lubricates it, but what's better than water for a lubricant besides everything, especially leather conditioners. So there's basically 3 types of leather conditioners you're going to run into, or at least 3 consistencies. You're going to run into the Wonder balsam type paste and waxes that is more of a solid Vaseline style consistency. You're going to run into more like leather milks is what I would call them. Like they're more like true conditioners. And then you're going to run into some oils. And for this process, what we're going to do is going to condition the leather from the inside out using one of these 3 conditioners. And the way that is done is, the simplest way of doing it is literally just grabbing a quarter-sized dollop of conditioner and just putting it on your hand and rubbing it on the inside of the boot, you know, because you can over-condition leather, but it's better to be a little bit over-conditioned than a little bit under-conditioned, in my opinion. And so I just grab some conditioner and just rub it on the inside of the boot. It's gonna lubricate those fibers, making it a lot more malleable and making it so that you don't have to recondition it after it's broken in. You probably don't have to condition it like once a year after that because, like I said, they're Doc Martens, so your sole's gonna wear out way before your leather does. So when it comes to choosing a conditioner out of those 3 types, the negative side of using a wax or a balm is because it's more of a paste consistency, it's not going to seep into the leather nearly as much. It's like trying to mop up Vaseline with a sponge. You can't get it to sponge up. It's just gonna like grab whatever's on top and it's not gonna sink in any deeper. And so if you're gonna use a balm, you might wanna heat up your boots just a little bit. You might lightly, emphasis on lightly, heat up the inside of your boot because you don't wanna ruin any of the thread or any of the glue that's holding anything together, just like barely above body temperature, and then put this on and then really work it into the leather. You have to put it on, and it's more than just one of these where you're like, oh yeah, it's conditioned. No, you need to put it in there and you need to work it in because that friction is gonna create heat. That heat's gonna liquefy this Vaseline consistency balm, and then that liquid state is going to allow it to seep deeper into the leather. So ideally, if you use this, get your hand in there, work it around, get it heated up, and get it to sink into the leather. Then after you're done with it, grab a towel, paper towel, and just clean up all the extra, because no matter how much you try to get it off, it's still going to be in there. So get a towel in there, wipe it off, and then just wear your old socks for the first like 3 or 4 times you wear them, because it is going to it's gonna leach some of this back into your socks, and it's not that big of a deal. It doesn't irritate your feet or anything. It's just kind of annoying to get greasy socks. So that's how you do the balm. Moving on to the milks, and this is kind of the sweet spot for me, because this more milky style conditioner, I would also include like the leather honey in there. And as for balms, there's all sorts of balms. I'll put some in the description, but the reason I'm not going over anything other than the Doc Martens is because most people have this balm. But when it comes to like a lighter conditioner that's not necessarily like oily, Venetian Shoe Cream is pretty expensive, but it will do the job. Leather Milk's a little bit more affordable, and both of these are lighter weight conditioners. And the thing that a lighter weight conditioner is gonna give you over some of the other conditioners is it's not gonna change the color nearly as much as like an oil or like a really heavy balm. Because leather is basically, once again, kind of like paper. When you get paper wet, it darkens because some scientific principle that I don't understand. When stuff gets wet, it gets dark. And so same thing with oil and conditioners. When you get it wet with conditioner, it's gonna darken it. A lot of these Doc Martens, because they have such a heavy plastic coating, it's not gonna darken them that much. But before you do any kind of conditioning or anything to your boots, try a little spot that's not as noticeable, and try a little spot so you can tell to see how much is actually gonna change the color of your leather. And that way you can make at least some sort of decision if you wanna continue with the process or if you're just gonna raw dog it and just do it dry. Maybe not the most appropriate thing. But, so try it on a spot before you commit to the whole boot, because it can change your leather, especially if it's not the plastic coated kind. Then onto our third type of conditioner, which is more of an oil conditioner. And I'll put links to all these in the description. And it is an affiliate link, so we get a little bit of money off of it. So if you are gonna buy some of this, consider using the links because it helps out with the channel. And it's what allows us to do all this stuff. Then onto the oils. So there's 3 or 4 main oils you can use. In the old Doc Marten break-in video, I did mink oil because this is what we use as firefighters. It is quite literally rendered mink fat. Some people had issue with that. So there's other options that don't have as much animal product in them. One of them is leather honey. These guys are nice, affordable. It's not quite oily. It's more of like an actual like honey consistency, but it still has the same effect. And then you also have Obenof's and Needs for oil. Obenof's is like working men's conditioner, like all the firefighters use it. It's positioned towards like the working class, working men. So all 3 of these are essentially going to do the same thing for docs, because it's not like you're trying to get these to last for 5 years and then get $600 worth of value out of them. So same concept. Leather honey is the cheapest. Well, I don't know actually which one's the cheapest. We'll put links and everything below. But what you do, same process, is a little bit more messy because it's like a liquid this time, right? So slap a little bit in there and just work it around. You want to get it, because if you don't work it around, there's a chance it's just going to sit on top of the leather. So even with this oil, you want to make sure it's worked into the leather. And then after you got a good coat in there, same process again, grab a towel, get it down in there, dry off as much as you can, and let it sit overnight. You know, you could wear it still like the same day, but it's gonna get your socks a lot more oily. It's not gonna hurt it if you wear it the same day, it's just a little bit more messy. And if you let it sit for a day, it'll dry out a lot more. And then that's pretty much it. And then the nice thing about that is, because all those fibers are lubricated, they're gonna move a lot easier. They're not gonna break as you break them in, and it's gonna increase the longevity. You're not gonna have to recondition them anytime soon, and it makes the break-in significantly easier. It's like the difference of bending a green tree branch versus an old brittle tree branch. If you bend an old tree branch, it breaks and shatters. Same thing with leather. If you bend a green tree branch that's conditioned and has some sort of moisture in it, then it's not gonna break. So same concept, and it makes it a lot easier to bend that branch and makes it a lot easier to hold that shape. So that's the general concept, how it's all done. And I guess to recap, so from best to worst, I would say honestly, the best way to condition these and the fastest way is the oil. It's gonna seep in faster, it's gonna be the longest lasting, it's the most effective, but it's just the messiest. The best affordable one is just water. The water one's super easy, and I almost guarantee you already have some of this, and this will condition it enough. And then absolute worst case scenario, if you don't want to do any of that, just double up your socks and do it raw. It sucks. That's why I'd recommend doing the water, but you can do it that way. It's just not the best way. So now what not to do, because there's a lot of videos out there of people coming up with the wackiest ways to break in docks, and it's not their fault. But don't microwave them. It's a terrible idea. Do not microwave any of your footwear, because it's gonna heat up glue. It could easily react with any kind of metal shank on the inside and cause some arcing and then ruin your boots, ruin your microwave. Don't microwave them. Don't beat them with a hammer. It's another really bad idea I've seen passed around. Everyone's like, well, put it some towels and beat it with a hammer. 2 issues with that. One is that this, like I mentioned 20 times, this plastic coating on top, it is fairly sensitive. It's a thin plastic coating, so if you beat it too hard, you could fracture it and cause a split in it, which is immediately gonna lead to premature cracking, which is inevitably gonna happen with your docks anyway. And the second reason is these have stiffeners in the toe and in the heel, and they're fragile. Like if I bend this too much, it's gonna keep that crease, and it's never gonna look the same as it used to. That's because it's a little synthetic counter in the inside. So don't beat it with a hammer, or you'll deform your docks forever. Next one is don't wear them in a bath. We already covered that one. You just don't want to get the fiberboard wet. It's never going to dry, and it's going to ruin the fiberboard. Don't put cooking oil on your boots. These conditioners like leather honey, mink oil, and Obenof's, and Chamberlain's leather milk, Venetian, they're specifically designed to not rot. So in the same way that tanneries take rottable flesh and convert it into non-rottable leather, non-perishable leather, you very well can't use a perishable conditioner on a non-perishable product, because it then takes the non-perishable product and makes it perishable. And so oils that rot, you don't want to put on there, which is a lot of cooking oils. And these are specifically designed not to rot, to have a long shelf life and have a long non-rotting life. I don't know what the word is for it. So don't use cooking oils. use an actual leather oil whenever you can. Don't overheat them. In my first video of breaking in docks, I didn't know quite as much, but I recommended putting a heater on them. And I still think I was pretty honest about like not overheating them, but still worth reminding. Don't overheat these boots. Be very gentle with the heat, especially where this heat weld thing is happening. You just never know what's gonna weaken this joint up. And then a reminder, try it on a small area first. Do not coat your whole boot and then come at me, oh, I ruined my boots, they're way darker than they were. You didn't tell me. I told you twice. Just try it on a small spot first, especially if it's not the smooth leather, because the smooth leather is not gonna change nearly as much as like their Crazy Horse and some of their other leather that's not plastic coated. That stuff will darken for sure. That is how I condition Doc Martens. That's how I would recommend it as a professional leather worker. And I put links to everything in the description, and I think that pretty well covers it. So let me know what you guys think, and if you want more of this style of content, support this video, because that's how we decide how we're gonna do certain content and what works and what doesn't work and what you guys wanna see. And support Rose Anvil builds, Rose Anvil 1. We just released travel wallet, the third camera attachments for the camera harness, and the new kilties. So, a lot going on, and thank you guys so much for supporting Rose Anvil 2. This is fun for me to do. I love doing this, and hopefully dispelling some of the rumors out there of how to break in docks, because there's a lot of dangerous ones out there. So let me know what else you guys want to see with this kind of stuff. And if you have any other recommendations that I didn't do in this video, put them in the comments, because I'm not saying everyone in the comments is going to be a good idea, but there might be some other additional ideas in the comments. So thank you guys. See ya.